Welcome to Philosophy of Value Workshops number 31 of Series 5. The question today is, why should we value the intrinsic value of other people? The reading from one of my books is The Pursuit of Value, Chapter 4, Section 8. And again, my central question is about human existence expressed most fundamentally as consciousness. I then explicate problems of life in terms of consciousness and look for answers in terms of value. And so I've done these things in previous workshops, as well as examining the character of value. In this project, however, I'm also called upon to present a general theory of value and its many applications. For example, ethical principles are values that guide our actions, and God is the believer's highest value. Yet other people are instances of intrinsic value of central interest to any theory of value. And other people are invariably the primary focus of value in our world. So today I want to discuss how other people figure in our world and how we relate to them philosophically. This kind of question about other people is usually monopolized as a question of ethics. But there are many other ways in which other people figure in our lives. For example, as social frameworks, as motivators, or as influencers of belief. So there are many other ways in which it is thought that we relate or connect to other people. For example, spiritually or cosmologically, through direct causal relations perhaps between people, or phenomenologically as intersubjectivity in the quality of our perception of other people. Let's first look at the idea of relations between people as spiritual or cosmological causal connections. This view is subject to criticisms of Malinowski and others of religion as magic, as the magic of hidden causes. For example, do this or that and you will be saved, like salvation by belief or church sacraments. There is also the idea that we are connected by and are part of a universal consciousness held by Hindu Atman, Bishop Butler's monism, Schopenhauer, Feuerbach and Rupert Sheldrake's Gaia hypothesis. But Williams, Rawls and John Findlay argue that individual separateness is basic to philosophy. I agree. We cannot employ an unexplained, mystical or magical way of connecting people. We apprehend other people through cognition, not through magical ethers. Yet it is often thought, even in ethics, that there is an almost magical connection between people. That is, there is more to our relation with others than our perception of them and our emotional responses. I wouldn't want to rule out genetically based empathy, quantum entanglement, or even ESP here. My objective is to admit all such factors in potentially transparent relations between people. This approach brings all these factors within cognition through which we can appraise them. That is, our relations with people is contained by our perception of them and our cognitive capacities. This approach also has the advantage of comprehensiveness as well as offering means of appraisal such as Hume's is-ought distinction, Moore's naturalistic fallacy, and the constraints of reason broadly defined. Thinking of people as a locus of intentionality of consciousness provides a way of relating dissimilar things. For example, truth, belief, or physical objects can be regarded as loci with different qualities of cognition. Or also, other people can be regarded as perceptions of objects with properties like subjectivity and value. On this view, different and potentially incommensurate elements like truth and other people become comparable in their different qualities of cognitive representation. The idea of people as a locus is a philosophical device which does not impugn their subjectivity or value. Phenomenology is such a method, emphasizing the appearance of things rather than their unknown essences. But we must avoid the danger of reducing our relations with people to academic theories such as a cognitive one. This perspective of how we value our conceptions of other people is my answer to the differences above. That is, conceptions of other people can be related to conceptions of other things and how we value them. And again, this is consistent with phenomenology that the world is apprehended through consciousness. I will later conclude by affirming the value of other people with the principle of value that I have advocated in these workshops. That is, the principle of the will to value, the value, and the affirmation of value. On this view, to value objects for their own sake, or not to value value, is self-defeating and self-negating. We can have a detailed discussion about this principle at another time and perhaps briefly later. As for relations with other people, this principle provides a reason for valuing other people that I'll explain later. Yet basically, this view is about valuing other people as part of valuing oneself and the world. In addition to this non-cognitive principle of value, with respect to cognition, I will later conclude with an appreciation of the quality of our perception of other people. As a preamble to this conclusion, I will now outline a number of ways in which we relate to other people. These are such approaches as ethics, reason, self-interest, knowledge, and finally, the pursuit of value. Relations with other people is thought to be ultimately dominated by ethics. That is the topic, that is the view that we should examine first. A mistaken idea here is that if other people have intrinsic value, then we have to value them. But there are at least three questions here. Do people have intrinsic value? 2, if they do, must we value them? And 3, if we must value them, why must we value them? Immanuel Kant attempted to establish necessary relation with others through cognition and reason. Kant failed due to several reasons, such as the impotence of cognition and Hume's is-ought distinction. Hume, A.J. Ayer, and many others argue that necessity is a property of logic, not ethics or physics. But the Christian and Kantian view of the intrinsic value of people remains intuitively powerful. Yet we still require an explanation of why we should value the intrinsic value of other people. For one, Peter Singer argues that the meaningful life requires concern for others as a wider purpose in life than ourselves. But this isn't an explicit or definitive reason for respecting the value of others. We could say that science can also provide a wider purpose in life than ourselves. Robert Nozick gives us another principle to treat everything as having the value it has. But there are at least three problems with this principle. One, it is an objectivist assumption that things have value in themselves rather than having value projected onto them. But in the case of people, we can accept this assumption as a compelling intuition. Two, Nozick's principle doesn't resolve the problem of conflicting values, say between justice and rights. For example, to treat one thing as having value may contradict with how we treat something else. Thirdly, the question remains, why should or why must we value the intrinsic value of other people? Nozick's answer is that they should be valued because they are unique and value-seeking eyes. But that doesn't explain why we should or must value unique and value-seeking eyes. Pragmatic or contingent explanations of utilitarianism, virtue theory, or psychology don't answer the question. Neither do they explain the feeling of moral necessity that we must value the intrinsic value of others. Some theories of ethics attempt to find a solution by grounding morals in forms of self-interest. Max Stirner and Ayn Rand, for example, present a theory of ethical egoism. But Rand's account is simply selfishness with a limited notion of self-interest. John Stuart Mill holds that it is a psychological and metaphysical impossibility to desire the unpleasant. But it is uncertain that psychological and metaphysical necessities can be established. Nietzsche's view is that man always acts for the good, that is, what he himself conceives as good. This allows for a wider notion of good, but the good here remains largely undefined. These views begin their systems with the self as the only realistic foundation for values or moral value. But no subjective foundation based on the self have ever found to be satisfactory. Yet one version develops the notion of the self with a more refined concept of self-value or self-esteem. This view is moving towards the kind of value theory of ethics that I want to develop. We could describe such a refined concept of self-value as enlightened self-interest. But how could self-value as enlightened self-interest include the value of other people? It could include the value of others because of the reflective character of moral action. That is, moral action induces the self-attribution of value. That is, favourable judgments and outcomes accrue self-value, unfavourable judgments negate self-value. The point is that harming others reflects badly on self-value and vice versa. But note that there are two presuppositions of this value, of this view, that we have not yet established. One, the intrinsic value of others that we might well accept intuitively. And two, a principle of self-value. Yet in practice, self-value is reinforced because people can't easily disassociate themselves from their actions. The need to find meaning in one's own behaviour makes it difficult to regard it as of no consequence. A belief in free will also makes people feel responsible for and identify with their actions. People thereby judge themselves as good and valuable or not by their actions. But Bernard Williams presents the charge of self-indulgence for theories of ethics based on self-interest. He says, what the agent cares about is not so much other people as himself caring about other people. But Williams does make the qualification that not all reflexive moral thought, that reflexive moral thought of thinking about oneself, is self-indulgent. Williams gives the example of modelling one's behaviour on somebody else as an ideal. And there are, of course, very different meanings and kinds of self-interest. For example, finding meaning in dying for others, like being crucified, is different from stealing a child's ice cream. Different kinds and degrees of reflexivity produce different moral assessments. For example, of egoism, of selfishness, of self-pity, of pride, or honour, or self-worth, or dignity, or self-esteem, or self-respect, or self-love. These are all reflexive attributions of value, but they are assessed in different ways. But these varied examples indicate that a morality based on self-interest might be viably constructed. The idea is that all motives are self-interested, but can have different kinds of self-interest. For example, we could contrast Ayn Rand's ethical egoism to Foucault's care of the self, or to a sufficiency of value. But even given this basis, we are returned to two basic questions. One, why should I accept that other people have intrinsic value? And two, why should I adopt the intrinsic value of others into my own value system? For example, sadists accept the intrinsic value of others but don't adopt it into their own value systems. In fact, sadists accept the intrinsic value of others in order to enhance their heinous satisfactions. On the first question, there are numerous arguments about accepting that other people have intrinsic value. The most basic is by reason, experience and empirical judgment. Or, I know that I have intrinsic value and it's exceedingly probable that others also have intrinsic value. Also, as conscious beings, people are primary candidates for having intrinsic value. These are straightforward ways of assessing value, but they are contingent claims based on human reason and judgment that don't claim necessary relations. Yet it's a strength of such a view that it's not necessary or absolute, but is fallibilist, like in a Popper's view of science. A fallibilist ethics can account for theoretical and human error and need not make absolute claims. Both Kant and John Stuart Mill claimed necessary relations which could not, I think, be justified. Removal of necessary relations also makes way for phenomenological description as a form of empiricism of mind. The variable and graduated character of mental states also cannot be subjected to strict necessities. Now we can ask the second question of why adopt the intrinsic value of others as my value. We can consider several arguments to answer this difficult and crucial question. But there are other questions following the notion of graduation above that must qualify any answer. Like, to what extent should I value the value of others? Should I value others equally as myself, or more or less than myself? These variable and graduated factors are further arguments against absolute or necessary relations with others. But I want to present what I describe as an inescapable, not necessary reasons for valuing others. One argument is that deep knowledge of others requires empathy and thereby the value of others. This strategy turns the difficult problem of value into an easier problem of knowledge. That is, knowledge requires appreciation of value because knowledge and science are value-laden. For example, Frank Jackson tells a story about Mary, a scientist who knows everything about colour but is colour blind. So Mary doesn't understand what colour is until she has the experience of colour. The point is that deep knowledge of others also requires a phenomenal experience of value and empathy. The argument with respect to others is that knowledge of others entails empathy and appreciation of their own self-value. Therefore, genuine knowledge entails empathy and valuing the self-value of others. That is, like the concept of pain, it is only by valuing or experiencing the value that we can know it. But this view is contentious. Does knowledge or empathy really entail valuing the self-value of others? Like our sadist earlier, we may know or empathise with others but not value them. A second argument is that human relations aren't a matter of Kantian necessity but Aristotelian disposition or expression. A self-valuing agent asks how he can express his value in the world rather than acquire value. He would seek to express positive value by respecting others and avoiding harming them. One problem is, how can a value-seeking agent acquire the values that he should express? Aristotle's answer was that practice the virtues in order to internalize them. Aristotle's answer, updated, is practice right values in order to internalize and express them. But how can we discern right values as valuing others in the first place? A third argument is that we are required to value the intrinsic value of others because A, denying or negating the fact of value of others is self-deception and thereby self devaluing. And B, wishing harm to others is pathological, the recognition of which would also devalue the agent. Yet these edicts only apply to agents who are aware of pathology and of others as intrinsically valuable beings. Yet this contingent strategy avoids the fallacy of employing necessary relations in value relations. A final and similar argument rests on the assumption of a will to value qualified by a will to truth. On a will to value and a will to truth, we must then ask, what is the best thing that we can do? One inescapable answer is attribute value to other intrinsically valuable and self-valuable beings. This is motivated by a will to value and guided by pragmatic and contingent judgments. Again, this strategy avoids necessary relations that can't be established. On the principle of a will to value, we go back to the same kinds of reasons for action as Singer and Nozick, but now they are just the best expressions we can find of value, not definitive principles. Nozick usefully defined people as value-seeking eyes, but the properties of self-value and seeking value are significantly endorsed by Nozick. But he doesn't develop this property of seeking value as a primary human drive. He is instead concerned with finding properties that we can or should value rather than the agent's motivations. This is because he espouses an objectivist rather than a subjectivist ethics. But there is still a feeling of moral necessity in ethics and about valuing other people that we need to explain. We can consider a number of possibilities, like a sheer lack of imagination or knowledge about the alternatives to the particular behaviour, or identification with one's own actions that gives the feeling of inevitability, like in free will, or the feeling of moral necessity can be derived from primordial drives like the will to value. I want to explain the feeling of moral necessity at a formal level of value, not at the material level. Material expressions of value, like theft, lying or murder, are relative, as argued in modern ethics. The formal content of value is about principles, ontology, and, I claim, structures of consciousness. But the material content of moral values, like stealing, have been relativized, and any underlying principles have failed or have been widely undermined. Subjective foundations like genetics and social requirements have also been found unsatisfactory. Other subjective foundations like happiness and self-interest have also not been a success. The inescapable principle that I advocate is again the will to value qualified by the will to truth. It is inescapable rather than necessary because it is a condition of the agent's capacities. Capacities like levels of consciousness, awareness of value, the will to truth, and affirmation of life. They are inescapable due to human development, truth and reason in its broader sense. Human development unavoidably involves consciousness, value, the will to value, and the value of others. The principle of the will to value is inescapable in my view because of the character of consciousness. That is, the development of consciousness means that satisfactions must be found in terms of value, and the principle of valuing other people is inescapable due to outcomes of reason and knowledge. In conclusion, we have outlined a number of ways in which other people need not be valued, and we have outlined a number of ways in which other people might be valued. And I presented the motivating principle here as the will to value. Reasons for valuing others are inescapable rather than necessary because they are conditional on the agent's capacities. For example, awareness of others, awareness of the other's value, knowledge of pathology, will to truth, knowledge, empathy and self-value. These arguments accommodate three crucial aspects of morals. 1. They provide a moral imperative founded on value. 2. They account for the finite capacities of reason, choice and knowledge. 3. They provide a moral imperative that is inescapable without invoking necessity. Together with my other arguments, I believe that the above offers an adequate moral theory of other people. My basic point is that the pursuit of value requires us to value other people. Next week we will discuss Kantian ethics that emphasizes reason, cognition and necessity. Let me have your criticism and comments on one of the websites like meetup.com, Philosophy of Value workshops. Thank you.